July 8, 1945, 6:15 a.m. POW Camp 174, Derbyshire, England. The parade ground was still wet from overnight rain, puddles reflecting the pale morning sky like fragments of broken mirror. 183 German prisoners stood in formation, 8 rows, exact spacing, shoulders back, eyes forward. They'd been standing for 7 minutes, waiting. The air smelled of damp wool and coal smoke, and the particular tension that comes before confrontation. At the far end of the parade ground, a staff car pulled up. The engine cut. A door opened. A British colonel stepped out, tall, grey-haired, wearing the uniform of a man who had spent the entire war earning his rank the hard way. He carried no swagger stick, no clipboard, no visible weapon, just walked across the gravel with measured steps that sounded like drum beats in the morning silence. He stopped 10 feet from the first row, surveyed the assembled prisoners with eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. Behind him, 3 junior officers stood at attention, waiting for orders. The prisoners waited too, bodies rigid, faces carefully neutral. They knew what was coming. They had been warned. The colonel spoke in accented but clear German. "You will bow when a senior British officer enters your presence. This is not negotiable. This is regulation. You will comply, or you will face disciplinary action." No one moved. 183 men stood motionless, defiant, without being dramatic, simply refusing through stillness. They had surrendered their weapons, surrendered their freedom, surrendered their country. But they would not surrender this. The small dignity of remaining upright, of not bending the spine, of choosing what submission looked like. The colonel waited 30 seconds. Then he said something that no one expected. "I understand." He turned to his officers, spoke briefly in English. They looked confused, perhaps even concerned. But orders were orders. They saluted, walked away, left the colonel alone facing 183 German prisoners who didn't understand what was happening. The colonel addressed them again, this time in a different tone, not softer, but different. Less command, more conversation. "You are soldiers. I am a soldier. We fought each other for 6 years. You lost. That is a fact. But losing does not mean you cease to be soldiers. It does not mean you have no honor left. I will not force you to bow, because forced gestures are meaningless. If I wanted you on your knees, I would have broken you in battle. I didn't break you then. I won't break you now." He paused, let the words settle. "But understand this. You are prisoners of war under British authority. You will follow regulations regarding work, conduct and order. You will show respect to guards and officers through compliance, not through bowing. If you refuse work details, refuse orders, refuse to maintain discipline, that will be addressed. But I will not waste my time forcing grown men to perform theatre." He surveyed them one more time, then said, "Dismissed. Report to your work assignments." The prisoners stood frozen, uncertain. This was not how confrontations worked. Someone was supposed to win, someone was supposed to lose. Instead, the colonel had simply reframed the entire conflict, removed the symbolic battleground, and returned them to the mundane reality of captivity. One by one, they broke formation, walked toward their barracks, their work details, their routines. And as they walked, they carried a question they couldn't quite articulate. What kind of victor refuses to humiliate the defeated? If this moment already changed how you see the war, subscribe. The next will surprise you even more. They were veterans, not fresh conscripts, not fanatical SS, but regular Wehrmacht soldiers who had fought in North Africa, Italy, France. Captured in the final months of the war when German resistance collapsed and whole units surrendered to avoid the Russians. Most were in their 20s and 30s. A few older men mixed in, all exhausted by years of fighting, all relieved the war was over but uncertain what peace meant. The camp held just over 300 prisoners, organised into work companies assigned to various labour projects: agriculture, construction, mine clearing. The work was hard but not cruel, the conditions adequate but not comfortable. British policy required POWs to contribute to reconstruction efforts while awaiting repatriation. Germany was in ruins, Britain was exhausted, and everyone needed labour. The colonel commanding Camp 174 had fought at El Alamein, landed at Salerno, pushed through France in 1944. He had seen his men die, had killed German soldiers, had earned the right to hate. But somewhere between North Africa and Derbyshire, between victory and peace, he had decided that hatred was exhausting and pointless. The war was over. The killing had stopped. What remained was the tedious work of managing prisoners and waiting for bureaucracy to sort out who went home when. The journey to England had been a study in contrasts. Transported from holding camps in Germany aboard overcrowded ships, the prisoners expected rough treatment, minimal food, harsh conditions, the casual cruelty of victors. Instead, they received British military rations, access to medical care, and treatment that, while not gentle, was professional. Guards maintained distance, but not hostility. Orders were given clearly, enforced consistently, punishment administered for violations, but not for existing. When the ship docked in Liverpool, they were processed through reception centres, documented, photographed, interrogated, sorted by rank and security risk. Officers went to separate camps, enlisted men to labour camps, suspected war criminals to investigative detention. The screening was thorough but not brutal. British intelligence officers asked specific questions, took detailed notes, cross-referenced answers against known information. Those who had committed no crimes beyond fighting for Germany were cleared for labour assignments. The train to Derbyshire took 6 hours. The prisoners rode in guarded carriages, watching English countryside pass, green fields, stone walls, villages untouched by bombing, a landscape that didn't look like it had been at war for 6 years. One prisoner, a former school teacher named Ernst, remarked quietly to the man beside him, "They won, but they're not destroyed. We're destroyed, and we lost. Maybe that's justice." The man beside him, a farmer from Bavaria named Johann, said nothing. There was nothing to say. Camp 174 was utilitarian. Wooden barracks arranged in rows, mess hall, administration buildings, infirmary, surrounded by barbed wire and watchtowers. Not a prison designed for punishment, just a holding facility designed for order. The first meal served was the same ration British soldiers received: potatoes, cabbage, bread, tea. Plain, adequate, consistent. The bunks had mattresses and blankets. The latrines had running water. The system was impersonal, but functional. On the second day, prisoners were issued work clothes. British Army surplus, dyed with a brown patch on the back to mark them as POWs. They were assembled for orientation. The colonel addressed them in German, explained the rules, outlined expectations, made clear that compliance meant decent treatment and non-compliance meant punishment. Then he said something unexpected. "You are not here to be humiliated. You are here to work while we determine how to send you home. Treat this as employment, not imprisonment. You will find it more bearable." That was when the bowing issue first arose. A sergeant, officious by the book, insisted prisoners bow when officers approached. It was regulation, he said, standard protocol. The prisoners refused. They argued it was unnecessary, degrading, that soldiers didn't bow to other soldiers. The sergeant reported the insubordination to the colonel. The colonel said he would handle it. Hence, the morning on the parade ground, the confrontation that wasn't, the colonel's refusal to enforce a regulation he considered meaningless. After the non-confrontation, the camp settled into routine. Morning roll call at 0600, breakfast at 0630. Work details from 0800 to 1700, with a break for lunch. Dinner at 1800. Free time until lights out at 2200. The work varied. Some prisoners farmed, some cleared bomb damage, some repaired roads, some worked in quarries. The labour was hard, but guards didn't abuse them. Supervisors didn't work them beyond reasonable limits. Injuries received medical care. Ernst, the former teacher, was assigned to clerical work in the camp administration. His English was functional, his handwriting neat, his demeanour non-threatening. He spent 8 hours a day filing documents, translating orders, helping British officers communicate with German prisoners. The work was tedious, but not difficult. The British lieutenant who supervised him, a young man from Kent, clearly educated, awkward in authority, treated him with distant professionalism. They discussed grammar occasionally, debated English versus German sentence structure, maintained the fiction that they were colleagues rather than captor and captive. One afternoon, filing records, Ernst found a document dated June 1945. A directive from British military headquarters outlining treatment protocols for German POWs. The language was formal, bureaucratic, but certain phrases stood out. Prisoners retain dignity as soldiers. Punishment for violations, not for identity. Reciprocity serves British interests as much as morality. He read it twice, then asked the lieutenant, "Do you believe this? Or is it just policy?" The lieutenant looked uncomfortable. "Does it matter?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because if it's just policy, it can change. If it's belief, it's more reliable." The lieutenant thought for a moment. "I think it started as policy. I think some of us have made it belief. Does that count?" Ernst nodded. It counted. Johann, the Bavarian farmer, worked in agricultural details. Planting, harvesting, maintaining equipment on British farms that had lost workers to military service. The work was familiar, almost comforting. Soil behaved the same in England as in Bavaria. Plants grew according to logic, not ideology. The British farmer who supervised them, an older man, too old for service, managing his land with the help of POW labour, treated them exactly as he would have treated any hired workers. He demonstrated tasks clearly, corrected mistakes without anger, expected competence, and rewarded it with tea breaks and occasional extra rations. One day, Johann asked through a translator why the farmer didn't hate them. The farmer looked genuinely confused by the question. Hate you for what? You didn't bomb my farm. You didn't kill my son. The Japanese did that, Burma, 1943. You're just Germans who lost a war. I need workers. You need work. It's simple. He treated us like humans, not enemies, Johann would write years later. That was the moment I understood. The war was over for him. It needed to be over for me too. Personal stories emerged in the barracks at night, whispered between bunks, shared over cigarettes, scrounged from guards who had learned that small kindnesses bought cooperation. Each prisoner carried his own war, his own reasons for being here. Otto, 28, had been a mechanic in a panzer division, captured in France in August 1944. He had fixed tanks, kept machines running, never fired a shot in anger. When British soldiers took his unit, he had been grateful, better them than the Russians. He worked now in the camp motor pool, maintaining British vehicles, doing the same work he'd always done, but for different uniforms. I was always just a mechanic, he said one night. The war was something happening around me while I fixed engines. Now the war is over, and I'm still fixing engines. Maybe I was never really in the war at all. Wilhelm, 35, had been an infantryman since 1939. Poland, France, Russia, Italy, France again. 6 years of fighting, 6 years of seeing friends die, 6 years of killing people he didn't know, for reasons that grew less clear every year. He was captured near Aachen in February 1945, half frozen, out of ammunition, relieved to surrender. He worked now, clearing unexploded ordnance, dangerous work. But he volunteered for it because danger was familiar and boredom wasn't. I thought capture meant death or torture, he told Ernst. Instead, it meant regular meals and work that doesn't involve shooting people. I don't understand the British. They won. They should hate us. But they just process us. Like we're a bureaucratic problem, not enemies. Heinrich, 42, oldest in his barracks, had been a sergeant in North Africa, captured at El Alamein in 1942, spent 3 years in camps before being transferred to England in 1945. He had seen multiple camps, multiple systems, learned to read guards and officers, to understand what compliance bought and what resistance cost. He told younger prisoners, "The British have a system, follow it, and they leave you alone. Fight it and they enforce it. But they don't enjoy enforcement. That's the difference. They're not cruel. They're just organised." In August, the colonel addressed the camp again. Standing on the parade ground, the same location as the Bowing confrontation, he announced that repatriation planning had begun. Prisoners would be screened for war crimes, political affiliations, security risks. Those cleared would be sent home in stages, beginning in late 1945 and continuing through 1946. Those with complications, missing documentation, uncertain home addresses in Soviet zones, suspected irregularities, would be detained longer. Then he said, "I know you want to go home. I want you to go home too. But understand, Germany is not the country you left. Your cities are destroyed. Your government is gone. Occupation zones divide what remains. Home might not exist as you remember it. Prepare for that." He paused. Then added, "While you're here, you will be treated fairly. That is my commitment. But fairness requires your cooperation. Continue to work. Continue to follow regulations. Continue to behave as soldiers rather than prisoners. Do that, and repatriation will proceed smoothly." It was the most human speech many prisoners had heard from a British officer. Not sympathetic. The colonel was incapable of sentimentality, but honest, acknowledging their situation without minimizing it, offering fairness without promising comfort. That night, prisoners talked about what home meant. Some had families they knew were alive. Some had families they hadn't heard from in years. Some had no families left. Some feared going home more than they feared staying. The war had destroyed geography and certainty. The word home had lost its referent. If you're seeing this war in a new light, subscribe. The next scene will challenge you even more. In September, something unexpected. A British officer asked for German volunteers to help train new guards in basic German language and customs. The goal was to improve communication, reduce misunderstandings, make the system more efficient. 3 prisoners volunteered, including Ernst. They spent 2 afternoons a week teaching young British soldiers, boys really, 18 and 19, conscripted in 1944, sent to guard duty because they were too inexperienced for combat, how to pronounce German commands, how to understand cultural differences, how to read body language and tone. The teaching sessions were strange, former enemies sitting in a classroom, one side explaining to the other how to manage prisoners more effectively. But the young guards were sincere, asked genuine questions, wanted to do the job well without being cruel. One guard asked Ernst, "How do we get prisoners to cooperate without threatening them?" Ernst thought carefully. "Treat them like adults, explain reasons, be consistent, don't humiliate them. Soldiers respect professionalism. They don't respect bullying." Another guard asked, "Do you hate us?" Ernst hesitated. "I did once. I don't anymore. Hate is exhausting. I just want to go home." The guard nodded. "My brother died at Arnhem. I should hate you. But sitting here teaching you language, you're just a teacher who got conscripted. I can't hate that." October brought the first repatriations. 50 prisoners, all screened, all cleared, all with documented home addresses in the British zone, loaded into trucks, transported to ports, shipped back to Germany. The remaining prisoners watched them go with mixed emotions: relief for those leaving, envy at being left behind, fear of what awaited them when their turn came. Johann was in the first group. Before leaving, he found the colonel, asked permission to speak. The colonel granted it. "Sir, I want to thank you." "For what?" "For treating us like soldiers. My father fought in the last war. He was captured by the French in 1918. They beat him, starved him, worked him until he couldn't stand. He came home broken. I expected the same. Instead, you gave me work, food and dignity. I won't forget that." The colonel nodded. "I hope you won't need to remember it. Go home. Rebuild. Don't fight another war." "I won't, sir." Johann left. The colonel watched the trucks depart, then returned to his office and continued processing paperwork for the next group. Christmas 1945 arrived with institutional ambiguity. The camp couldn't celebrate. Celebrating with prisoners felt wrong, but ignoring the holiday felt cruel. The compromise: a special meal on Christmas Day, permission for prisoners to hold their own service, minor relaxation of rules. The prisoners organised a simple ceremony in the largest barracks. Someone had saved paper and pencil, drawn a small Christmas tree on the wall. Someone else had fashioned a cross from scrap wood. They sang carols in German. Stille Nacht, O Tannenbaum. Voices blending in harmony that transcended language and enmity. British guards stood outside listening, not interfering, just hearing the same songs their own families were singing across England. After the singing, Ernst stood and spoke. Not a sermon. None of them felt religious after what they'd seen, just a reflection. We are here because we lost a war. We are alive because someone decided prisoners deserve to live. I don't know if we deserve it, but I'm grateful. Tonight we remember what we lost, our country, our families, our certainties. Tomorrow we continue waiting to go home. That's all we can do. When the ceremony ended, a guard entered with a parcel. Inside, chocolate bars, enough for each prisoner to have one piece, and a note in German, signed by the colonel. From one soldier to others, Merry Christmas. Wilhelm, the veteran infantryman who had fought for 6 years, held the chocolate and cried for the first time since 1939. By spring 1946, most prisoners had been repatriated. The camp population dropped from over 300 to just 80. Men with complicated cases, missing documentation, uncertain home addresses. Ernst remained, his family's location in the Soviet zone making repatriation difficult. He continued working in administration, became almost a permanent fixture, the German who knew where everything was filed. One afternoon, the colonel called him to his office. Ernst entered, stood at attention. The colonel gestured to a chair. "Sit, we need to talk." Ernst sat. "Your repatriation has been approved. You'll leave in 2 weeks. Soviet zone, so we're coordinating with Red Cross to get you to a processing center in Berlin. From there, you're on your own." Ernst nodded. Relief and fear competed. "Thank you, sir. Before you go, I want to ask you something. Off the record. Do you think this worked?" "This camp? The way we handled it?" Ernst considered carefully. "What do you mean by worked? Did it change anything? Did treating you fairly make any difference? Or would you have hated us the same either way?" Ernst thought for a long time. "Sir, I came here expecting punishment. I found order instead. I expected cruelty. I found professionalism. Did that change me? Yes. Do I still think Germany was wrong? Yes. Do I hate Britain? No. Would I have if you'd beaten me and starved me? Probably. Does any of this matter in the larger sense? I don't know, but it mattered to me." The colonel nodded. "That will have to be enough." Ernst's departure was quiet. No ceremony, just a truck at dawn, a few handshakes, a final walk through the camp gates. The colonel stood in the yard, watching, as he had watched hundreds of prisoners leave over the months. Ernst paused at the gate, turned back, raised his hand in something between a wave and a salute. The colonel returned it. The truck disappeared down the road. The colonel returned to his office, where paperwork for the remaining prisoners waited. The work never ended. The processing continued. The machine of post-war bureaucracy ground on, sorting the aftermath, trying to restore order to a continent that had forgotten what order meant. By late 1946, Camp 174 was nearly empty. The last prisoners were repatriated in November. The camp was decommissioned in December. Buildings converted to other uses, the barbed wire removed, the parade ground returned to being just a field. Within 2 years, you couldn't tell there had been a camp there at all. The colonel retired in 1947, returned to civilian life, died in 1963, age 68. His obituary mentioned service in North Africa and Italy, mentioned command of a POW camp, mentioned nothing about bowing or Christmas chocolate or the hundreds of small decisions that collectively determined whether captivity was brutal or bearable. Ernst made it to Berlin, found his family alive, rebuilt his life in East Germany. He worked as a teacher again, spent 40 years educating children in a system he didn't believe in, retired in 1985, saw the wall fall in 1989, died in 1994. In his papers, his family found a letter written in 1946, but never sent, addressed to the British Colonel, Camp 174, Derbyshire. Sir, I have been home 3 months. Germany is destroyed, as you warned, but I am alive, and I remember how you treated us. You didn't make me bow. You didn't break me. You just managed me with fairness. That mattered more than you know. I will teach my students that enemies can choose decency. I learned that from you, with respect and gratitude. The letter was never mailed. The Colonel never read it. But the sentiment was real, carried across decades, proof that small acts of restraint echo longer than grand gestures of cruelty. Other prisoners scattered across a divided Germany carried their own memories of Camp 174, their own stories of the Colonel who refused to force them to bow. Some told their children, some kept silent, some forgot deliberately, wanting to leave the war behind entirely. But enough remembered that the story persisted, passed through families, a small footnote in the vast history of World War II's aftermath. In 1989, a researcher interviewing former POWs asked Johann, now 73, still farming in Bavaria, about British captivity. Johann said, "They were professional, that's the word. Not kind, not cruel. Professional. They had a job, managed prisoners until repatriation. They did it by the book, but the book was fair. That made all the difference." The researcher asked, "Did it change your view of the British?" "Yes, I expected revenge. I got bureaucracy. That was more merciful than revenge ever could be." "Do you think the British were right to treat you well?" Johann thought for a long time. "I think they were right to treat us like soldiers. We fought. We lost. But we were still soldiers. The Colonel understood that. He didn't need to humiliate us. Victory was humiliation enough." If this story has shown you that strength lies in restraint, that true power is knowing when not to break an enemy, subscribe, because history's deepest lessons are written in its smallest mercies. The parade ground in Derbyshire still exists, though the camp buildings are long gone. It's a field now, unremarkable, used for grazing sheep, showing no sign that 183 German prisoners once stood there refusing to bow, and a British colonel once decided that symbolic submission mattered less than actual compliance. But the moment remains, preserved in memory and letters and the stories families tell. The moment when a colonel faced defiant prisoners and chose not to break them, chose not to force the issue, chose to reframe the conflict entirely, not because he was soft or sympathetic, but because he understood that meaningless gestures are worthless and forced dignity is no dignity at all. He had won the war. He didn't need to win every battle afterward. He had defeated them militarily. He didn't need to defeat them spiritually. He had authority. He didn't need to prove it by making grown men bend their spines. That restraint, that refusal to humiliate when humiliation was easy, taught the prisoners more than any speech could have. It taught them that the British were serious about their regulations, serious about fairness, serious about treating prisoners as soldiers rather than animals. It taught them that victory could be magnanimous, that power could be exercised without cruelty. that civilization could survive even the worst war in human history. The war had taught them fear. The colonel taught them something harder, that enemies can be honourable, that defeat doesn't require humiliation, that the hardest discipline is the discipline of restraint. On a rainy morning in July 1945, a British colonel walked onto a parade ground and faced 183 German prisoners who refused to bow. He could have forced them. He could have punished them. He could have made an example. Instead, he said, "I understand." 2 words. 10 letters. A choice to prioritize substance over symbol. Compliance over theatre. Order over humiliation. A choice that rippled through the camp, through the war's aftermath, through decades of memory, proving that the smallest acts of restraint can teach the largest lessons about what civilization means. The prisoners had expected to be broken. They found themselves managed instead. They expected cruelty. They found professionalism. They expected revenge. They found a colonel who understood that forcing men to bow was meaningless. And meaningless victories are no victories at all. The war had taught them to fear their enemies. Captivity taught them to respect their captors. And respect, earned through restraint rather than demanded through force, proved more powerful than any punishment could have been. The parade ground was wet. The prisoners stood defiant. The colonel chose mercy over theatre. The war taught them fear. Peace taught them restraint.